Hey, Paul, I don't know if you got that pop up, but we're live streaming now. So,
I did. Thank you.
cool.
That's just amazing how easy this is.
Mhm.
Hello to anyone who's tuned in early.
Paul, I sent the attachment to your personal Gmail and the LVA email.
I'm testing out screen sharing. Do y'all see the confidentiality agreement on screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Glad I'm getting that out of my system before 8:30. Before we get started on the formal agenda, I think with Emily Ann attending, I want to do a brief round of introductions, and I would love to have you guys both introduce you and your roles at the library, but also kind of the role that you're supporting the committee with through the search process. So I didn't want to put you on the spot in case that's helpful to know going into the meeting.
Sure.
I started watching the live stream, Taylor, just to see what it looks like on the other end. It's I think as the last person who spoke, it was just your screen up there.
Oh,
I'm the only person viewing it, so
nice. Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna have a ton of viewers on these, but we'll see.
yeah.
But we have, need to do it.
Always good to comply with the
Yeah.
Paul, did you receive the email?
I did, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay.
I've got it queued up so I can share it when we get to that point. Sorry, that's just creepy to watch myself on YouTube. I closed that out.
Yeah, I'm not able to, because if I have it open on mine, since I'm hosting the Zoom, it like echoes everything.
Yeah, I muted the YouTube just because I didn't want to cause the same thing. But if you're bored this afternoon, you also go back and watch the committee.
Well, I'm recording this so I can do the minutes, so I'll have to rewatch anyway.
I am so sorry. I'm hoping that we'll be pretty efficient. The committee members have each individually reviewed the job description announcement, and I think there's a couple of things that we'll just confirm via discussion briefly, update the job description, and hopefully then vote to approve it before. I'm hoping we won't go a full hour and a half.
Okay.
And that I think both Robert Canada and Preston have a 9:30 commitment, so we would lose a quorum just about if we extended too far past that point.
Okay.
Morning, Deb. You're on candid camera.
Awesome.
Taylor's got us up, and the YouTube live stream is already going. So we're just a fully compliant bunch, which we just wanted to make sure we could say when you joined.
I appreciate that.
Good morning, Peter.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good. Good morning, Emily Ann.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Emily Ann. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning.
I think we're waiting on Preston and then Sandy, and then we should be ready to dive in. We're at 8:30, so we'll give it one more minute. We can do introductions while we're waiting. Good morning. My name's Paul Brockwell, the chair of the library board, and have been privileged to be a part of the group serving in this capacity. And I'm also going to ask everyone, I'll just kind of moderate the introductions, but we'll start with our committee members. So Peter Broadbent.
Great. I'm Peter Broadbent. I'm on the library board, a member of the search committee. I've been chair of the library a couple times before.
Glad Scott.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Blythe Ann Scott. I am vice chair of the Virginia Library Board and also commissioner of the revenue down in the city of Norfolk. Good to see you all this morning.
Robert Canada.
Good morning, everyone. Robert Canada, serving as a board member, and also I serve as the Vice President for Inclusive Excellence for the University of Lynchburg.
Preston Bryant.
Morning, Preston Bryant. I'm with McGuire Woods Consulting, and I am a current library board member and past chair.
And Deputy Secretary.
Hi, good morning. I'm Leanne Gullickson. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Education on behalf as the designee for Secretary Gadara. Really thrilled to be here.
We're thankful to have you. Thank you for being able to come bright and early. I'll have our council introduce herself and then the staff who are helping support the committee as well. Deb Love.
Good morning. I'm Deb Love. I am a senior assistant attorney general and chief of the education section in the attorney general's office. And in that role, it's been the longstanding practice of our office that the section chief advises boards on searches. So I'm happy to be with you today and through this process.
Vanessa and then Taylor.
Good morning. I'm Vanessa Anderson, the Human Resource Director for the library and the staff liaison to this process.
Morning, I'm Taylor Melton. I'm Dr. Treadway's executive assistant, and I think my title is acting secretary for this committee, so I'll be providing administrative support.
Yeah, and last but not least, a special guest with us today is Sandy Treadway, the librarian of Virginia, who needs no introduction, actually, probably.
Good morning,
and
everybody.
we're excited to have her.
Is Sandy a candidate? Search over.
They keep trying to do that, but no, I just want to do anything possible to help you find an absolutely great future librarian.
I shared the version of the job description with all the feedback with her after collecting what folks had sent in, and she said, "You know, this is starting to sound like a really good job." And I said, "Are you sure you're not interested?" All right. Well, before we get started, could we have a motion to approve our agenda as presented?
So moved.
Blythe moves. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Canada. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved. And without objection, I'd like to formally let the minutes note that we've appointed Taylor Melton, the acting secretary for this committee. And normally that would be a role that the librarian would play by virtue of a lot of different provisions of code and policy, but for a lot of reasons that wouldn't make sense here. So without objection, Taylor, welcome to the gang. And we'll dive right into our first item, which I'm going to recognize Deb Love for. There's in the packet of materials distributed, there was a confidentiality agreement and code of ethics statement. And then she also wanted to do a brief discussion of kind of FOIA requirements as they relate and how they practically relate to an executive search like the one that we're doing. So Deb, I'll let you take it away and let me know if you want me to bring up the confidentiality agreement. I've got it queued up if you want me to share a screen.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. That'd be just fine.
Okay. Now where did
Before
it
we
go?
get started, Chairman Brockwell, is it possible, and not, not to call anybody out, but can we check with Taylor to make sure everyone that's on this call has completed and turned in their confidentiality and ethics statement?
We can check that. I think that I know at least one has been submitted by Mr. Bryant. I have mine filled out in hard copy form, so I haven't actually turned it in yet. But I think none of the matters that we're going to be talking about today are confidential or should be closed, because we're just doing the planning for the search.
Okay.
So this would probably really be most important to get in before we start to talk about and review candidate information later this summer.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share screen, Deb, and let me know if you're seeing the confidentiality agreement and ethics statement.
Okay, I can. Is anybody unable
Yeah.
to see that? All right. This is a document that I can tell you that I've done half a dozen searches for presidents of universities in Virginia, as well as some other agency head searches. And without exception, there's been a confidentiality agreement of one form or another that the search committee has agreed to be bound by during that process. I think the reasons are pretty obvious. Obviously, the folks that we're looking at are enormously qualified. I suspect most or all of them are currently employed and may not be prepared to have folks around them know that they're looking for or considering other opportunities. So we can walk through this. I suggested to Paul that he provide this to you in advance so that you all had a chance to read it. So I'm not going to do that, but really the chief elements are recognizing sort of the seriousness of your responsibility serving on this committee, acknowledging that it will be up to Paul as chair to speak on behalf of the committee. And what happens in the committee stays in the committee. We're not going to share information outside the committee about who thought what about who. At the end of the day, we're going to have what we believe will be an outstanding selection, and we need to all be behind that. But the process for the sake of the candidates, as much as anything, we need to keep everything in the strictest of confidence. And I think I've not had fortunately, I've not seen breaches of this, but I did have a search where before when the search committee had made it, I guess this was the board, had made its final selection, before everybody left the room, word had gotten out. And a member of the board heard from someone they knew somewhere in the country that so-and-so was the board's choice. And it's obviously less than ideal. This is going to be a really important moment for the library, and we want to make sure that we're managing the process in a responsible way. And at the end of the day, it's within the chair's discretion to remove a search committee member for failure to comply with these terms. I'm also going to speak shortly to the records retention, but there's an element of that in here that you're going to hang on to the records that are related to this search. Are there any questions about this agreement? This is, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, Deb, what's the applicable FOIA exemption for all this?
I'm sorry, Peter, that you broke up and I wasn't able to hear all of your question.
Sorry, what's the applicable FOIA exemption for this?
So once right now we're in open session, and of course, most of what we do will be in open session.
Sure.
When we, so FOIA, in terms of keeping information confidential, FOIA provides the public access to records, not to information.
Exactly.
So if a member of the press were to ask you about what happened, or who are you looking at, or, how's it going? How big a pool or whatever, anything that information is not what they're entitled to, right? In request
Right.
for information, I would refer to Paul as chair, and he can determine. It may be that the response will be, we've got nothing to say at this time. It could be that we'll have something to say, but that's something that is, I think, within the prerogative of the chair.
Right. Yeah, I mean, my only concern is that Supreme Court, the new Supreme Court decision last fall, Hawkins v. Person information, not exactly identical, but not far, really seems to limit a little bit about what we can do. In the normal exemption in 2.23705.1-5 for records related to closed meetings really just applies to records recorded in use in closed meetings and in not other records. So that's just what I'm trying to figure out. I just don't want to sign something here that potentially violates FOIA law.
Well, this doesn't, this confidentiality agreement does not speak to records that you or the committee or the library are going to withhold, right? That's going to be a separate matter. This really concerns your relationship to the committee, your agreement to keep the information that you learn throughout this process confidential. It's a separate question whether or not the records that might be the source of that information. So, for example, the CV of a candidate,
Exactly.
right? Whether or not that can be withheld under a FOIA request is a different question from whether or not you're going to talk about it if asked.
Okay.
Is that helpful, Peter?
Yeah, no, that is helpful. That's a helpful distinction. That's fine. That's fine.
And for the record, I have no concerns and trust all the folks who are here on this call to uphold the highest standards that we've been talking about with regard to confidentiality and ethics. And that's probably a good segue into the kind of FOIA mini briefing that Deb wanted to do for us, as kind of how FOIA intersects with our obligations as the search committee and what exemptions we should be aware of and when we can invoke closed meeting for discussing candidates.
Right. So this will be very brief because everybody, in this meeting is already well versed in and has heard a lot about FOIA already. The thing I have seen with most search committees I've been on is there's a point early in the process where the search committee is frustrated that they can't go into closed session to talk about the job description or the qualities or qualifications that they're looking for in candidates. You are going to be able to go into closed session when you're at the point of your discussion necessarily involves talking about specific identifiable individuals. So while you can sit here and say, Colin Powell would have made a great state librarian, that's not something we're going to be able to go into closed session to talk about, even though, we're talking about an identifiable individual. That's not a conversation that requires our talking about Colin Powell or anybody else that you can think of. It's really when we're down to having the applications in front of us and having the discussion about quality, their qualifications, your interest in interviewing folks, the interviews themselves, the decision-making after the interviews, who do we want to advance to the full board, for example. Those discussions will be able to be held in closed session. In addition, I'm going to recommend every time that we do go into closed session, that we also go into closed session for consultation with counsel. Regularly, somebody will want to turn to me in one of those sessions and ask me a question. And if we've only gone in to be able to talk about personnel, that's not going to cover the attorney-client conversation that we're going to want to have. And then this is really more for the board's benefit. When this gets to the decision being made by the board, we're also going to be able to go into closed session to talk about the contract that we're going to be negotiating and hopefully entering into with the next state librarian. There's an exception for contract negotiations. Obviously, we're not going to negotiate in public about how far we might be willing to go. So the FOIA permits us to be able to be in closed session for that. I intend to be with you at all meetings and in all closed sessions. I will be helping to monitor our compliance and making sure that the conversation stays within the parameters for which we've gone into closed session, but I also encourage you, to take ownership of that as well. And, check yourself and don't hesitate to ask, if maybe we're starting to wander a little bit off topic. Because as you remember, when we come back out in open session, each one of you is going to have to certify whether or not you believe it's true that you went into closed session, talked about only the things that you said you were going to talk about and didn't talk about anything else. But I think that's really all for FOIA at this moment. Are there any questions about the FOIA and the closed meetings? We're going to be, I'll be working with Paul and Tyler, making sure we've got the script. We're all ready to go. We've thought about this stuff in advance. Each time it's going to come up.
Any questions? Thank you, Deb. That's very, very helpful to refresher for us as we embark on this work. I'm going to share briefly the next item, which is the overview of planning, timeline, and process search, to kind of remind us where we've come from and where we're going in this proposed
Well, I
timeline.
think there was one other item that you and I had thought I might just touch on briefly, and that would be the records that are being developed.
Oh, yes. Yes. Good.
In the course of this search. There will be FOIA requests. If someone asks you for copies of records related to this search, your job is to just refer that right on to Tyler. I would share it with Paul and me as well if you think of that, but we need to get those requests into the hands of staff promptly so that we can meet our obligations to make a timely response under FOIA. I recommend that if possible, you have a dedicated email address or folder in your email for the email records that you receive. That'll make it easy when there's a request that comes through that you can provide the material we need for the turnover or for review as needed. Bear in mind that all the records that are developed in the course of this process are records in the transaction of public business, and therefore are public records that must be kept for the requisite period of time. And if there's an agency in the Commonwealth that wants to take this obligation seriously, it's the Library of Virginia, since you're responsible for those records retention timelines.
So
I
Deb,
just wanted to have a
question?
quick reminder of that. Yeah, absolutely, Preston.
So the notes that I'm taking right now, are these my personal notes or are these records of the search committee?
These are records of the search committee. So you're going to want to be careful what you write down. You're going to want to be careful what you put in email. You've all been schooled, I think, about the possibility that email exchanges occurring quickly in real time can become like a meeting. They can function like a meeting. So you're going to want to watch your email broadcast to everybody or your reply all. I recommend against reply all. You can blind copy folks, and that'll help with the reply all situation. Years and years ago, I had a client agency that conducted a search for a person and selected someone, and a disappointed candidate believed himself to have been discriminated against on the basis of his age. And we ended up going all the way to trial, to a jury trial on this matter, and we lost. And I think the reason we lost was a member of the search panel had written in a note on the interview that the selected candidate seemed young. Now, what they meant was energetic, or at least that's what they said they meant, but the jury didn't buy it. So be careful what you write down. I mean, sex, race, age, disability, religion, ethnic background, those sorts of things. Those are not proper grounds for making a decision in an employment context.
So a follow-up, just to be clear, I mean, this is about people. This is about personnel. So the notes that I sit here that I will be taking, and if we're referring to potential candidates, are those not exempt personnel notes?
Well, they're records, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, but we can withhold them, on the other.
Okay, yeah.
Now, Peter talked about that recent Virginia Supreme Court decision on that. So we'll take, we'll be taking a look at that, and we'll look at the particular request that comes in. But typically personnel records and, are able to be withheld from a FOIA request.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul, may I ask a quick question?
Sure, Sandy.
Yeah, this is just since I need to make sure that the records responses that we have the process in place. Normally, we've been advised by the AG's office that any actual response should come from our designated agency FOIA officer. So board members should give things to Taylor, but then when a response is determined, it would come from our FOIA officer. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the best practice.
Okay, super.
So when if a request for records comes in, that goes to Taylor, and we'll be discussing how best to identify the records and what, if anything, needs to be turned over and what may be withheld. If it's a request for information about that, I think those should go to Paul for consideration what response, if any, is appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I want to be mindful of time because two of our members have a 9:30 commitment. So I'm going to.
I actually have just one quick request.
Sure.
So that I can set up the proper rule on my email. Can we designate a specific subject? Deb, do you have a suggestion, or Paul? Should it always say LVA search committee? Because that way I can just make sure all of these go where they need to go into the file.
I think that's a great idea. LVA search or LVA search committee. Maybe LVA search would be the easiest because it's short and you know exactly what the label is for. That's a great idea. I have a folder in my email that's basically says search right now, and I'm putting
Okay.
it in.
Yeah, and you can confirm that later on, and I can set up my rules so that it automatically goes into that folder. Thank you.
I'm sharing draft the timeline for the search. So, as a reminder, for maybe this is most helpful for you, Emily, and on June 13th, our executive committee met last month and reviewed a number of materials that Sandy provided, including salary data, comparative across the country, sample announcements, and with all the information that we had done through research, determined that we could conduct an effective and strong search without the need for a firm. And with support from the HR director at the library and other key staff at the library who would be support staff for the committee. Sandy obviously told the executive management team, and then at the June 26th annual meeting, shared her intention to retire before the end of the calendar year. So here's where we are currently. So right now, our biggest task today is to look at the draft job description announcement and hopefully work through any questions or concerns. And by the end of our meeting, have an approved set of copy for the graphic designer at the library to kind of gussy up, as it were, into a really attractive job announcement that we can start to post and solicit applications. Some of these dates I've adjusted slightly back because of we didn't quite get it out by July 10th, which was an initial target, but the holiday made it harder to schedule folks. But by August 18th, start screening the candidates and selecting the top 4 or 5 to do a first round of Zoom interviews with the search committee, and then doing those interviews the next week of August, and trying to select our top candidates to bring forth for on-site interviews at the library that would include half day of several different panels, meeting key folks and possibly giving a presentation on which their candidacy would be evaluated. So that would all happen theoretically the week of September 5th. Keep in mind, this is all going to be dependent on what we see coming in application wise, but also our schedules together as a committee, with a target of November 1st to have an accepted author for the 10th librarian of Virginia. So it's an aggressive schedule. So I doubly appreciate your commitment to this effort, and know that things may change as we get down the road, and we have to respond to the realities we experience when it comes to the number of applicants we have and scheduling ability. One thing I will ask Taylor to do following this meeting is to look for several days that you can possibly commit either in late August or after the Labor Day holiday to block out a couple of different afternoons that give us flexibility so that we know we're all available these dates and we can possibly squeeze in virtual interviewing for those first round candidates. Oh, we lost Deb. All right, no one breaking your rules while she's gone. The next item, she's back. All right, the next item is reviewing the job description and announcement. So I'm going to share screen as well. Let me pull that up and then share. I want to thank everyone for their feedback, and I think there's two things I think are notable to highlight and update since we last since the email that went out with the initial draft. One is that Peter brought up several great points. One regarding the community of genealogists and historical researchers who are a very important constituency for librarian users, and I want to make sure I'm getting to the right section for that, because he shared some draft information, and then here we go. So I'm highlighting that on the screen under their responsibilities. So I ran what Peter sent by Sandy just for some background and information, and she said that's absolutely correct. They're an important constituency, and she also wanted us to be mindful of possibly not ruffling any feathers with other key constituencies. So she drafted some language that's inclusive of both the professional organization, the chief officers of state library agencies, and the key stakeholders like the Friends of the State Archives, Genealogical Society, and the Public Library Directors Association, to make sure that they don't feel they have a very active community, and we don't want them to feel like they're not seeing themselves in the job description as well. So fostering open communication, building strong personal and institutional relationships with these key stakeholders is a must-have for the next librarian, and we want to make sure that our friends in these particular groups know and see that. So that was one very helpful thing that Peter provided in the way of feedback. Another great point that he made, and I think I'll share my thinking on this, is under qualifications and characteristics. Deb, we mentioned wanting to ask you about this. So I think Peter made a strong case that the Code of Virginia and the concurrent regulations don't necessarily require that the holder of this position also have a Master's of Library and Information Science degree from an ALA accredited university. And I think I have two thoughts that I think are great that Peter shared. One, it would kind of comport with the governor's priorities around removing kind of barrier access to certain jobs in the state workforce. But I think that even broader than that, to his point about limiting the candidate field, I think we could massage the language there from required and also acknowledge that there are other degrees that might be attractive to this role. So there are plenty of university library directors across the country who hold doctorates in English or doctorates in other related fields, history, for instance, that are very qualified folks that we would not want to necessarily discriminate against because they don't have this specific degree. So I guess I wanted to open that particular conversation up and see what folks are thinking. And thank you, Peter, for again sending your thoughtful comments to the committee.
This is Preston. May I ask Sandy just what a best practice is in terms of these kinds of state librarian searches? Is this requirement more often than not, or less often than you would expect, or what?
I would say more often than not, you do see it as a requirement. The one thing I would say is keep in mind that there's only 9 state libraries that also have the state archives and the records management functions. So in some states, it is basically what our library development group does. So in that case, it would be hard to do that work without that master's degree. But I would say, I don't know of a state librarian. No, I do. I know one and actually it's interesting, it's the California State Librarian who came a long convoluted career path, but he's really good at what he does. I will say that he does not have it, but everyone else that I've interacted with does. So it is common. But if the code doesn't specifically say it for this position, the board has defined the credentials for a professional librarian in Virginia, and that is part of it. So it's really, I would have to defer to Deb on whether this particular position should say required or maybe preferred.
Well, and I turned off my camera. My Wi-Fi's being a little funky right now, so I'm trying to save some bandwidth. I mean, I would have come to the conclusion that the master's degree was required here, but I'm a lawyer.
Deb, you're breaking up, but we're not hearing what you're saying.
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what else to do. Let me try another room, maybe in my house.
We can hear you now, so go ahead.
All right. I would have come to the conclusion that the master's degree, the library science degree was a requirement for this position, given that the role of the state librarian is a professional librarian position for a library operated by the Commonwealth.
Chairman Brockwell, I would definitely concur with what Deb said. You made reference to, some library directors having doctorate degrees in other fields, but my question would be, do you know, or do we know if they also have a master's degree in library science?
Could you say that one more time, Robert? The question you have, sorry.
Sure. So I concur with what Deb was saying about, this position should require a master's degree in library science, library and information science. I was referring back to your comment about, of some library directors who have PhDs in other disciplines. But my question would be is, do we know if their master's degree is in library science?
I have not been able to do an exhaustive search. I primarily looked at universities when I was looking at this in Virginia, and many of them have doctorates in history or English, and some of them do have MLISs. I think the William Mary Dean of Libraries does. I could not see where the UVA Dean of Libraries had a MLIS, but Sandy may have a better read on this. She's in professional associations with a lot of these folks and can kind of speak to some of the norms that you see in that field.
I would just say, in terms of academic libraries, it's probably a little bit more that a few of them might not have the MLIS, but would have that advanced degree than you would find in the state library community. But most of the academic librarians in Virginia do have it. It's just the reality, I think. It would put them strongly ahead of another candidate, I would think.
So back to Peter's, and I think we should hear from Peter, but Peter's pretty good observation of, are we unnecessarily or unduly limiting the field by requiring this? Is that a valid concern, or Sandy, in your experience, do you think we will, with this requirement, get a full and broad and enviable pool of applicants? And Peter, I don't mean to speak for you, so.
I would hope so. I would certainly hope so, and certainly on the agency side, we're going to support getting this out far and wide, and making sure that folks that have the background, the experience, and that credential know about it. But there is always the possibility that there is an exception out there, someone who really has learned it on the fly, but has the, somebody with just an MLIS but who doesn't have the knowledge of and sensitivity to the importance of history and historical records is going to be at a huge disadvantage here too. So, you know, that's why it's tough. I would lean toward requiring it, but I could also be comfortable with it being changed to strongly preferred. Which would,
Let me go back to and ask Deb to repeat again. What does she think the law is on this? Do you think, Deb, the law requires this?
Well, so we've got 42.1-15.1, which is the qualifications required to hold professional librarian position. It requires a knowledge of books and of library technique equivalent to that required for accreditation from any accredited library school, or one that requires graduation from a school of library science. So we have two options there, right? Knowledge of books and of library technique equivalent to that required for graduation, or requires graduation from a school of library science. And I'm talking myself around to Peter's perspective here. Public libraries, public libraries operated by the Commonwealth shall not employ a person who doesn't meet the qualifications established by the library board.
and Deb, those are in the administrative code.
Right. And Peter also mentioned some sections that define the library as an institution, right, Peter? Institution of higher learning that appeared to have some sort of exemption from those regulatory requirements.
Right. Yeah, as I read that the library board essentially is supposed to adopt regulations for the required certification, and the library board has exempted libraries of institutions. And there obviously are a variety of institutions in Virginia, but state institutions, but the Library of Virginia is one of those. I mean, my larger concern is simply that obviously the role here, while it's called the Librarian of Virginia, that the core role is really the records which the library holds. For example, the position of Archivist of the United States historically has not had an MLS degree. I think there was one, there has been one in recent years, but let's say in the last 50 or 60 years, none of the archivists of the United States, including the brand new archivist, Dr. Shogun, have an MLS degree, because it's generally thought as being a degree that requires a PhD in history, or in her case, I think political science related to early America. But it's not one that obviously the Archivist of the United States or Sandy has plenty of staff who have an MLS degree. The question is it really necessary for the chief executive officer?
Mm.
Would you feel comfortable, Peter, if we to that point, rather than saying required, perhaps struck that word and said strongly preferred or preferred?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Is that okay with the committee?
That's perfect.
That gives us some flexibility, because odds are we probably will get a lot of candidates with this credential, but it leaves room for those who may not have it or have it yet, who could be potentially strong candidates.
Yeah, I'm supportive of that. I also had a question for Sandy, Mr. Chair, about the tenure requirement. I think the other bullets are very strong and support the incredibly thoughtful job description above, but it is possible that you have someone with, say, 8 or 9 years who was on the fast executive track, who might have the skills and competencies, as well as the imagination and creative side that you're looking for, per the last bullet. So I just was wondering, number one, if that was a legal requirement, and two, if you could expand on that 10 captured.
It's not a legal requirement. Sandy, I don't know if you can speak to the origin of the 10 years, but I also would say as a potential to speak to that, perhaps we should create a range here for like 7 to 10, because if you've got 7 years of experience,
Yeah,
the 10 might be a good Would the committee be amenable to that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, a great point. I think that that makes it a little less rigid in case we find some folks who have a significant amount of experience but haven't hit a decade.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see everybody in the screen, but I wanted, so I'm going to unhighlight this now because we've kind of dispensed with that particular question and come to a good solid position, I think, for the search. I'm going to go back up to the top of the document so we can work through it. And then once folks feel comfortable, I hope that we can sign off on the language here to start the ball rolling. So a lot of this is pretty boilerplate. We're inviting applications. This is just the background summary of the position. So it nuts and bolts information about number of employees, divisions, annual budget, and characteristics we seek, people who are passionate and energized about the role of a public humanities agency. Helping educate and inspire audiences across the Commonwealth regarding history. Kind of speaks to the large state academic public multi-type library archives. Those sorts of experiences are probably well primed for a role like this. It contextualized the position as one of 7 cultural agencies that fall under the Education Secretariat. I think this was a question we had, but I actually think it's becoming a better practice to go ahead and we have no room for negotiation because the salary is sort of set by the State Budget Act. But being upfront about what the current salary is, we know from our comparative data across the country that we're 4th in the nation for 4th highest compensated role in the nation, which is, I think, a very strong. When you combine that with the breadth of our historical collections, I feel like we won't have any trouble attracting candidates.
Paul, if I might, there's actually a little more flexibility in the Appropriations Act. There's a little bit of latitude. There's a midpoint range, which is what is typically a lot of agencies rely on, this is the salary. But there's some other language in the Appropriations Act that provides a little bit of flexibility on that. And I'm sorry, I don't have those numbers with me. I've left those at the office, but when we get to before the library board to make its decision, we're negotiating a contract, we can have more conversation about that, but I can get you the range.
Okay. And I that's somewhat new to me. I assumed, Peter, you have a question?
Just a quick question for Deb. Is it also possible that the foundation could, if it so chose, could provide a supplemental payment for that position if that became a sticking point in negotiations, which seems unlikely?
Yeah, Peter, I'd have to double check the Appropriations Act on that. Not every
we are
agency that has a foundation has the ability to accept funds for
Right.
those salaries. I just don't recall whether the
Right.
library.
No, I'm not sure either. I just wanted to raise the question that if we came down to a sticking point, to see if that might be an avenue.
Sandy's raising her hand. I think she wants to clarify that the library is eligible for that supplemental salary from our nonprofit foundation. We've never in the past have done that, I don't think, but we would have to get written permission from the governor's office to do a salary supplement from the foundation. And I also would want to have some conversations about, if we got there, if that was a thing, what level of resources would be available given the foundation.
Sure.
It actually was done once. My predecessor did have that.
Well, I think we can just leave it to Deb to massage that as she does more research. It's probably just a clarifying statement.
Okay. And so moving into the key duties, responsibilities, again, these were crafted in partnership with Sandy and given her years of experience in the role, but nothing surprising here, as you've seen. I'm going to scroll through these slowly and chime in if you have any questions or concerns about wordsmithing or.
Chairman Brockwell, I do, in regards to second bullet. I know I thought I made the suggestion, recommendation, the last sentence where it says fosters a culture of respect and inclusion and supports each member of staff in to be inclusive. We can't just say his or her, right? So if we're trying to attract qualified individuals, then we have to be open to, using inclusive language. So it would either be in their efforts.
Support staff in their efforts to, okay. And we did respond to one of your comments here too about support staff to include everyone at the library. So not just the professional roles, but housekeeping, facilities, all the operational management that the agency had exercises. Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna fish for a little bit, but then I'll go to that thing, okay?
I'm just going to keep scrolling and.
Yeah. We'll come down. Yeah, write it down. I put my feet on a little bit.
Okay. Under qualifications and characteristics, we've amended the first two bullet points, and I think that the others are pretty solid support. As Emily Ann said, the hope and goals of attracting a top tier candidate. Under application process and deadlines, so we've set up a special email address that only Vanessa has access to for people to express interest or send their materials in, and ask that they include all these information, all this information, cover letter, CV. We asked them to include a list of 3 references and noted that we will not contact them without prior approval or consent of any applicant being considered. And this is language that Vanessa also advised us on. So open until filled, but priority consideration, please submit materials by August 15th. And then generally, we also say any questions about application process, any hiring policies and procedures, compliance information, any accommodations can be addressed to Vanessa, who has graciously agreed to help navigate that for our applicant pool. We have the Commonwealth's EEOC statement. And then the last parts are not necessarily the job description, but I think it's helpful. These are what kind of the ancillary pieces of the announcement, just sharing a little bit more about the Library Foundation, and Richmond. So knowing that we might get plenty of folks who are out of state who might be interested in the role, giving us the history of the library, the fact that we house the most comprehensive collection of materials on Virginia government history and culture in the world. We want to mention the foundation because they're an important partner to ensuring that we can raise private support to enhance the mission of the library. And then I've made a lot of edits to this section. So Emily Ann, I welcome your thoughts on this as a newcomer to Richmond. But basically we wanted to make sure that folks who saw this looked at the description of our city and said, hey, that sounds like a place I'd like to move. So it highlights all the cultural and performing arts amenities, and including our sister agencies, VMFA and Science Museum, all the attractions that bring in international tourism, our culinary strength, which is very important because I'm food motivated, and sprinkling in some other publication accolades, like National Geographic named us a top 10 international food travel destination. Talks about the outdoors, which I know is important for Preston. Let us know if I missed anything about the kayak information, and if the class 4 rapids is still correct. And then just general, travel accolades. So we were named the #7 best destination in the United States to visit by Lonely Planet, and the New York Times back in 2020, which I don't know if that worked out really well to drive a lot of tourism that year, but we were one of the 52 places to visit in 2020. And then our strategic location, 2 hours from the nation's capital, we're, a hop, skip, and a jump to mountains, a hop, skip, and a jump to beaches. It's kind of you couldn't ask for a better location in the state. I apologize to any of you non-Richmond folk, Blythe and Robert, but I'm biased.
Mr. Chair, as a new transplant to Richmond of like 6 days, I teased Madam Secretary, we should now have this in all of our job postings as well. I thought it was a phenomenal addition to also show the culture and additional thought partners and stakeholders that the candidates may be able to work with. My only comment, I think this is an impeccable candidate job description. My final question for the other committee members, since you all have been very active on the board much longer than myself, was just in regards to the reading of those top key duties. Would you say that they rank in order of sort of most importance, time? At least that's how myself and many of my peers read the role of like, these will be my most critical components. So I defer to you all if you feel that's there, but it seems like you hit all of the key important points, and I'm excited to see who the candidates are.
That's a great question, Emily. Looking at this, I'm not sure, Sandy, you might be the person to ask for this in terms of priority. Like, what would you say? I mean, everything's a priority to you, probably.
Of course.
Yeah. But what do you think we've done a good job of listing them out in kind of order of importance for the duties, if that makes sense to Emily's question, Emily Ann's question?
Yeah, that was a challenge in trying to do it, because really this job is juggling all of these.
Yes.
But I personally, but it's up to the committee, feel strongly that having the collections one first sends the message. That's why we exist. It's because we have this amazing collection going back to the earliest days of American history. And that's unique in the Commonwealth. No one else is the repository for this. And I think making sure that a candidate who might come from an organization where that is not the case understands, that is critical. Now, obviously, I've got a state archivist and I have lots of collection people that do the day-to-day work of that. But it is a responsibility that's important to this position.
Thanks, Sandy. That's helpful.
Hey, Paul,
Yes.
just in your about Richmond, you may want to just note somewhere, weave it in that the greater Richmond area is home to at least 5
includes, yeah,
colleges and universities. You got Virginia State, U of R, Virginia Union, Randolph-Macon, VCU. That's 5 right there. So just so they know, it's an academic community, and public and private research institutions, et cetera, et cetera. You can massage that as you.
Okay.
We don't need to work it out right here, but I think that's a signal, strong signal for.
Maybe it's worth mentioning the population in the regional to Chesterfield and Ranco in the same kind of paragraph up here. I'll highlight that if y'all are comfortable with discretion in that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going back to Emily Ann's question, I was looking through the bullet points as you said that, and I had not thought about that before because I guess I've been too in the weeds. But I agree with what Sandy said about the collections coming first, and then number 2 is like those are the top 2 for me. The strategic direction to the agency. It's a working management role, which is not always the case in this executive office. Sometimes they're more travel based, but this person really has to keep the trains running, as it were. And then everything else seems like it's spot on in terms of the specific code related responsibilities. That was a great question, and I feel like as hard as it is, Sandy's done a good job of helping us order these in a way that's logical.
My only question, Mr. Chair, was in the last bullet. It because of the prior revisions you all had made, that seemed like a pretty significant duty of cross collaboration with the larger communities. So just wanted to be conscious of that falling last.
Absolutely. Okay, so would the committee be amenable to elevating this kind of possibly after the code responsibilities related to the commission service in the Secretary of Ed's office?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sandy, how does that sound to you in terms of the external relations piece of it?
That's absolutely fine.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Great. I
Paul,
wanna
may
stop-
I make one other suggestion, not on the bullets,
Sure.
but just ask the committee to consider being a little bit flexible on the date that's put in for first review of applications. For example, it may take a week or so to get these posted in all the places. And then a lot of folks are on vacation at this time of year. So pushing it out, if it needs to be 1 week in order to get good candidates, even though it's open
Right.
after
No, I
that.
think that makes
Somebody
sense.
can submit after that, but it might just not discourage somebody and give them time to see it, get back from vacation, prepare an application. 1 week at this point won't matter. And I'm very flexible about, my last day here. So we can, getting a good person is the most important thing.
Would folks be comfortable with the 18th, that Friday, the Friday of the same week, or would we want to extend it to the Monday, the 21st of August? It would 4 more days be a sufficient,
Yeah, go ahead and give them the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say that too.
perfect. Okay, no, it's great suggestion, Sandy.
Mr. Chair, last thing on the date, do you usually signal like close of business or before midnight? Just so that there's not any discrepancy? I don't know what the common practice is here.
We haven't, I mean, I don't know, Vanessa, you might have a better handle that from the day-to-day management of it. We could absolutely specify, by 5 p.m. on August 21st, which is that Monday. And that way we're able to start reviewing everything on Tuesday.
Yeah, that 5 p.m. time will work.
Okay. Wonderful.
Just for out of state candidates, that way they know they're in the right time zone and
Yes,
still
yeah,
able to
yeah.
submit.
Yeah. Okay. We're not in daylight savings time, are we currently? We are in daylight time. Okay. No, that's great. I love specificity. Any further questions before we consider voting to approve the job description announcement?
One small item, just in due course, put page numbers on these.
Oh, will do.
Yeah.
Peter, this is Deb. I went with the help of my able assistant, was able to retrieve what I needed. What we've got is the state librarian is assigned a salary in what they call the level 3 range, the midpoint of which is the number you've got there currently. New appointees should not exceed that, but there is provision in the Appropriations Act if the person who is the next state librarian has a salary that is close to that already, closer than 10%, then you've got the ability to go a little bit higher. So I think leaving it where it is just fine. That would be the maximum
Okay.
that would typically be permitted.
And the committee's expressed some comfort with me working with you on this technical update to that to make sure we leave a little bit of flexibility, but it's helpful to know that background.
Yeah, since I'm leaving today and not back until Sunday night, I'm not gonna be able to work with you this week on it. So I want to make sure I got something to you today.
Okay, all right.
I'm loading my car right now.
So you think it's okay to leave as is, or how would you suggest that we?
I would leave it as it is.
Okay. All right, knowing that we're at time for 2 of our members, is there a motion to approve the job description and announcement?
So move.
Clive moves, and I don't know who that was that seconded.
I'll second.
Okay, Peter seconds. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Any opposed? No. All right, the ayes have it. We've done the most important part of our meeting today. I will share via email because we're running short on time, there's a list of places that Vanessa will be posting this position in professional organizations that's been developed. It's pretty comprehensive and has been compiled with advice of several folks. And as follow-up, Taylor will also be surveying you for calendar spots in late August and early September to block out for the Zoom interview rounds. But thank you for your time today. This has been a really productive meeting together, and looking forward to the work ahead, and appreciate all that you're bringing to the table. Without objection and with no further business, we are adjourned. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you all. Have a good
Thank you very much.
Take care.